The old cabin stood beside Lake Serenity in upstate New York, its log walls darkened by time and damp, its windows reflecting the still, gray water. For me, Clara, it was supposed to be a retreat, a place to escape the stifling routine of my life with Mark. But it was becoming something else entirely, a crucible of desires I hadn't dared to acknowledge for years. My marriage to Mark had become a muted symphony of unspoken resentments and polite silences. We coexisted, sharing a comfortable home, but the vibrant melody of our early love had faded to a barely audible hum. Mark, a city man at heart, though he feigned appreciation for the rustic charm of the cabin, spent his days on work calls, his gaze fixed on his laptop screen, the glow reflecting in his increasingly distant eyes. Our conversations were transactional, our interactions efficient, devoid of the lingering glances and whispered laughter that had once filled our days. I was drowning in the quiet, the silence of the lake mirroring the silence between us, a silence that pressed down on me, suffocating my spirit. There were moments, stolen moments in the vast emptiness of the days, when a phantom limb of memory ached, the feel of his hand in mine, the shared dreams whispered under summer stars. But those moments were fleeting, wisps of smoke swallowed by the cold air of our present reality. Then came the unexpected arrival of Ethan, Mark's godson, a young man on the cusp of adulthood, adrift after his first year of college, was sent to us for the summer to find direction amidst the peace of the Adirondacks. Ethan, barely 20, pulsed with a raw, untamed energy, a stark contrast to Mark's contained weariness and my own quiet resignation. His presence promised to shatter the still surface of our lake cabin life, to send ripples across the stagnant water. I felt a tremor of apprehension mixed with a flicker of something akin to our anticipation. Part of me dreaded the intrusion, the disruption to my carefully curated solitude, but another, more reckless part, felt a stirring of something else when Ethan's beat-up truck finally rumbled down the long, winding driveway. He emerged, lanky and sun-kissed, with a guitar case slung over his shoulder and a grin that seemed to ignite the dim, shaded clearing. He greeted Mark with a casual nod, then turned to me, his eyes, the startling blue of a summer sky, meeting mine with a directness that made my breath catch. "It's great to finally meet you properly, Aunt Clara," he said, the easy charm in his voice sending an unexpected warmth through me, a ripple of sensation I hadn't anticipated, hadn't wanted to feel. The initial days were a whirlwind of unfamiliar sounds and movements. Ethan filled the cabin with music, the raw chords of his guitar echoing through the log walls, his voice, still rough around the edges, singing songs of youthful longing and restless dreams. He helped Mark, awkwardly at first, with some minor repairs around the property, his youthful energy a jarring contrast to Mark's sighing confidence. He even offered to help me with dinner, his presence suddenly filling the kitchen, the space that had long been my quiet domain. His laughter, spontaneous and unrestrained, echoed in the quiet rooms, a sound that felt both jarring and invigorating. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, the cabin thrummed with a different kind of energy, a raw, vibrant current that disturbed the stagnant air. I found myself listening for his footsteps, drawn to the sound of his guitar, subtly altering my routine to be in the same room, to catch a glimpse of his easy smile, to feel the unexpected warmth of his youthful presence. As the days deepened into weeks, a subtle, insidious shift took hold, a slow, deliberate current drawing me further and further out into dangerous waters. I found myself observing Ethan with a new, unsettling focus. The way sunlight caught the golden hairs on his forearms as he worked outdoors, the casual confidence of his movements, the unguarded intensity in his blue eyes when he spoke of his passions, each detail sharpened, magnified, becoming almost hyperreal. The glances he cast my way, seemingly innocent, lingered a moment too long, held a flicker of something more than mere politeness. The accidental brushes of our bodies, in the narrow kitchen, on the porch steps, sent jolts of awareness through me, a sudden, disconcerting heat. It was a sensation I recognized, the ghost of a desire long suppressed, now stirring, stretching, tentatively reaching for the light. I fought against it, tried to rationalize it as a harmless appreciation for youthful energy, a welcome distraction from my marital emptiness, but the subtle, insistent pull was undeniable, a slow, seductive current drawing me towards the treacherous depths. One still, humid evening, as the sun bled across the lake, staining the water with streaks of fire and bruised purple, Ethan and I found ourselves alone on the dock. Mark, predictably, was on a late work call, his voice a muffled drone from inside the cabin, leaving us to the twilight and the hushed lapping of water against the wooden planks. We sat in a companionable silence for a while, the air thick with the scent of pine and damp earth. Clara, Ethan began, my name a soft murmur on the still evening air, his voice deeper now, losing the last traces of boyhood. I feel like I can actually talk to you here. Really talk. I turned to him, my breath catching in my throat, my pulse quickening with a nervous anticipation I couldn't quite name. You can talk to me, Ethan, I managed, the words a soft exhale, barely audible above the gentle lapping of the lake. Always? He shifted, turning to face me, his gaze intense in the fading light, those blue eyes holding mine with a disturbing directness. There's something, he hesitated, a muscle ticking in his jaw, his voice dropping even lower. Something I haven't told anyone. Something I feel. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. I knew, with a chilling certainty, what was coming, the unspoken confession hanging heavy between us, a dangerous precipice looming. I reached out, my hand trembling almost imperceptibly, and placed it lightly on his arm, a gesture both of encouragement and a desperate attempt to ground myself. What is it, Ethan? I whispered, the question laced with a dangerous, thrilling apprehension. He took a breath, a ragged inhale that seemed to fill the space between us, then turned his hand beneath mine, his fingers intertwining with mine in a grip that was suddenly, shockingly, intimate. It's you, Clara, he breathed, his voice thick with a raw, undisguised longing. It's you. His gaze dropped to my lips, then back to my eyes, a silent question hanging in the air, a dangerous, thrilling invitation. And in that moment, in the fading light by the still, gray water, the dam finally broke. He leaned in, the air charged, electric, and his mouth met mine, not in a tentative brush, but with a sudden, fierce possessiveness. The kiss was hot, urgent, a raw explosion of pent-up desire, a forbidden territory crossed with a reckless abandon that mirrored the secret yearnings of my own heart. The kiss was hot, urgent, a raw explosion of pent-up desire, a forbidden territory crossed with a reckless abandon that mirrored the secret yearnings of my own heart. It was a kiss that swallowed the breath from my lungs, ignited a fire in my blood, a sensation so unfamiliar, so intensely alive after years of muted existence, that it was both terrifying and intoxicating. When we finally broke apart, breathless and trembling, the air between us thrummed with a dangerous electricity. The silence that followed was thick, heavy with unspoken words, with the weight of what we had just unleashed. Ethan, I managed, my voice a ragged whisper, barely audible above the frantic hammering of my heart. We can't. The protest felt weak, hollow even to my own ears, a flimsy defense against the tidal wave of desire that threatened to drown me. He was close, too close, his breath warm against my face, his blue eyes, darkened with a newfound intensity, searching mine. Why not, Clara? He breathed back, his voice husky, insistent. Why can't we? Because... My mind groped for reasons, for the solid walls of morality and obligation that should have stood firm between us, but they felt suddenly flimsy, insubstantial, swept away by the force of this illicit current. Because it's wrong, Ethan. Richard, you're his godson. I'm married. The words tasted like ash in my mouth, empty pronouncements against the roaring fire in my veins. Richard doesn't see you, Ethan said, the words low, almost brutal in their honesty. Not really. He's distant. You're alive, Clara. I see you. I see you. His gaze held mine captive, burning through the carefully constructed walls I had erected around myself, seeing the woman I had buried beneath layers of duty and resignation, a woman I had almost forgotten existed. His words were a dangerous bomb, a seductive justification for the forbidden desire that was clawing its way to the surface. And in the echoing silence of the lake cabin, with Richard lost in his oblivious world inside, the wrongness of it all began to blur, to fade at the edges, overshadowed by the raw, insistent rightness of how it felt to be seen, to be desired, to be alive again. He reached out again, his hand cupping my jaw, his thumb tracing the line of my trembling lips. "Don't tell me you didn't feel it, Clara," he murmured, his voice a low plea. "Don't tell me that kiss meant nothing." And in that moment, looking into those intense blue eyes, feeling the warmth of his hand against my skin, the truth of his words resonating deep within me, I couldn't lie. "No," I whispered, the confession torn from me, a reluctant surrender. "It wasn't nothing, Ethan. It was everything." A slow smile spread across his face, a smile that held both triumph and a hint of something darker, more dangerous. "Then don't fight it, Clara," he breathed, leaning closer once more, his lips hovering just above mine. "Don't fight us." And in that moment, by the still, gray waters of Lake Serenity, with the twilight deepening around us and the whispers of the pines sighing in the evening breeze, I stopped fighting. I surrendered to the pull, to the dangerous, intoxicating current that had swept me away. I closed my eyes and let him kiss me again. The world dissolved around us, fading into a blur of sensation. His lips were demanding now, urgent, tasting of summer and something wild, untamed. His arms wrapped around me, pulling me closer, pressing my body against his, the hard planes of his chest against the soft curves of mine. The years melted away, the weight of routine and resignation lifted, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I was simply a woman, desired, desiring. Lost in the reckless abandon of a forbidden embrace, the dock creaked softly beneath our feet, the only sound besides our ragged breaths and the gentle lapping of the lake against the pilings. Time ceased to exist, boundaries blurred, and in the fading light, by the still, gray water, we stepped across a line I knew, with a chilling clarity, we could never uncross. But in that moment, in the white heat of desire, the danger, the wrongness, the potential wreckage of it all, it simply didn't matter. All that mattered was the feeling, the fire, the terrifying, exhilarating sensation of being truly, finally, alive again. Okay. Here is part 3 of the story in English. Continuing from the kiss on the dock and maintaining the established tone and elements, the world dissolved around us, fading into a blur of sensation. His lips were demanding now, urgent, tasting of summer and something wild, untamed. His arms wrapped around me, pulling me closer, pressing my body against his, the hard planes of his chest against the soft curves of mine. The years melted away, the weight of routine and resignation lifted, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I was simply a woman, desired, desiring. Lost in the reckless abandon of a forbidden embrace, the dock creaked softly beneath our feet, the only sound besides our ragged breaths and the gentle lapping of the lake against the pilings. Time ceased to exist, boundaries blurred, and in the fading light, by the still, gray water, we stepped across a line I knew, with a chilling clarity, we could never uncross. But in that moment, in the white heat of desire, the danger, the wrongness, the potential wreckage of it all, it simply didn't matter. All that mattered was the feeling, the fire, the terrifying, exhilarating sensation of being truly, finally, alive again. The kiss deepened, intensified, becoming a desperate exploration, a silent conversation spoken in tongues of flesh and breath. His hands moved from my back to cup my face, tilting my head back, exposing the vulnerable curve of my neck, and a shiver ran through me, not of cold, but of pure, raw sensation. My own hands, hesitant at first, found their way to his hair, the thick, sun-warmed strands sliding between my fingers. I pulled him closer, wanting to lose myself completely in the intoxicating scent of him, The taste of him, the dangerous, thrilling reality of him when we finally broke apart again, breathless and disoriented. The twilight had deepened, the lake now a sheet of pewter reflecting the first faint stars. The air between us was charged, electric, vibrating with the unspoken question of what came next. We stood there for a long moment, chests heaving, gazes locked, the silence a palpable thing, heavy with the weight of unspoken desires and the looming shadow of consequence. It was Ethan who finally broke the silence, his voice husky, raw with emotion. "Clara," he whispered again, my name a plea, a question, a desperate invocation. "Come inside." The invitation hung in the air, simple, loaded, a point of no return. Inside wasn't just the cabin. It was across another boundary, a deeper transgression, a plunge into a world of forbidden intimacy from which there might be no return. My breath caught in my throat, a knot of fear tightening in my stomach, but beneath the fear, a tremor of anticipation, a reckless, desperate yearning. I looked back at the cabin, the windows dark and silent, Richard lost in his oblivious world within. Then I looked back at Ethan, his blue eyes burning into mine in the deepening twilight, his hand still lightly holding mine, his touch sending shivers of heat through my veins. And in that moment, in the face of that unspoken invitation, the familiar walls of my carefully constructed life crumbled. Duty, obligation, morality, they all seemed suddenly distant, abstract concepts, meaningless in the face of this raw, undeniable hunger. "Yes," I whispered, the word a fragile surrender, a capitulation to the desire that had consumed me. "Yes, Ethan, let's go inside." He didn't speak, but his hand tightened around mine, his eyes darkening with a mixture of triumph and something akin to fear. Or was that just my own fear reflected back at me? He led me off the dock, his hand warm and strong, guiding me towards the cabin, towards the darkness within, towards the unknown territory of what lay ahead inside. The cabin was dim, lit only by the soft glow of the dying embers in the fireplace and the faint moonlight filtering through the windows. The air was cooler, still carrying the scent of pine and damp earth, but now overlaid with a new, unspoken tension, a palpable expectancy that hummed between us. We stood for a moment just inside the door, our bodies close but not touching, the silence stretching, thick with unspoken desires and the weight of the forbidden act we were about to commit. Then, slowly, deliberately, Ethan reached out, his hand tracing the curve of my jaw, his fingers light as a feather against my skin. His eyes held mine captive, searching, questioning, seeking a confirmation, a permission. And in the depths of those blue eyes, I saw not just desire, but something else, something more unsettling, more vulnerable. A flicker of uncertainty, a hint of fear, a desperate need for something I wasn't sure I could give or should give, but it was too late to turn back now. The line had been crossed, the dam had broken, and the flood of desire that had been building within me for years was about to be unleashed. With a breath, a silent surrender, I closed the remaining space between us, my hand rising to meet his, my fingers lacing with his, a silent pact sealed in the dim light of the lakeside cabin. And then, with a low groan that was half pleasure, half pain, he kissed me again, and the world, once more, dissolved into a blur of sensation, a dangerous, thrilling freefall into the heart of the forbidden. And then, with a low groan that was half pleasure, half pain, he kissed me again, and the world, once more, dissolved into a blur of sensation, a dangerous, thrilling freefall into the heart of the forbidden. The cabin receded, Richard receded, my entire life receded, until there was nothing left but Ethan and the burning intensity of the moment. His kiss deepened, no longer tentative, but demanding, possessive, his tongue tracing the seam of my lips, then slipping inside, exploring with a boldness that sent shivers down my spine. I met his kiss with a hunger that surprised even myself, a desperate yearning that had been buried for so long it felt like a revelation, a violent, beautiful awakening. My arms wrapped around his neck, pulling him closer, my body molding against his, the years of restraint, of quiet resignation, shattering into a million pieces. We moved deeper into the cabin, drawn by an invisible force, a magnetic pull towards the shadows, towards the darkness, towards the inevitable. He led me, not spoke, his hand in mine, his eyes never leaving mine, the unspoken desire a palpable thing, a silent promise hanging heavy in the air between us. We stumbled, almost blindly, towards the living room, the faint glow of the dying fire casting dancing shadows on the log walls, illuminating the reckless path we were now committed to tread. He pushed me gently back against the rough bark of the log wall, the texture scratching at my back through the thin fabric of my dress, a sensation that was strangely arousing, a counterpoint to the burning heat of his lips, the urgent pressure of his body against mine. His mouth left mine, trailing kisses down my jawline, to the sensitive skin of my neck, his teeth gently nipping, sending shivers of pleasure and a tremor of fear through me. "Clara," he murmured again, my name a ragged breath against my skin. "I want you. God, how I want you." The words were raw, honest, stripped bare of any pretense, any polite facade. And in their stark honesty, in their blatant declaration of forbidden desire, there was a terrible, irresistible beauty. I knew, with a cold certainty, that this was wrong, that it was dangerous, that it could destroy everything. But in that moment, pressed against the rough log wall, with his body hard against mine, his lips burning against my skin, the wrongness of it all ceased to matter. All that mattered was the feeling, the heat, the terrifying, exhilarating sense of being truly, fully desired. "Ethan," I breathed back, my voice thick with emotion, with a surrender that was both terrifying and liberating.
"Yes.
"Please." The word was a key, unlocking a door I had long kept locked, a door to a world of sensation, of forbidden pleasure, of reckless abandon. And as the door swung open, there was no turning back. He needed no further prompting. His mouth returned to mine, his kiss deepening, becoming more urgent, more demanding, his hands moving with a newfound confidence, exploring the curves of my body, tracing the lines of my waist, cupping my breasts through the thin fabric of my dress, sending jolts of heat through me with every touch. He pulled back slightly, his eyes burning into mine, a question in their depths, a silent seeking of permission, of confirmation. And in that moment, looking into those intense blue eyes, seeing the raw desire reflected back at me, feeling the wildfire burning in my own veins, there was only one answer I could give with a small, almost imperceptible nod, a silent surrender of all restraint, all reason, all pretense of control. I gave him the answer he sought. And in the dim light of the lakeside cabin, with the shadows dancing around us and the lake whispering secrets outside, we stepped together, hand in hand, into the heart of the forbidden, into the fire that would consume us both. Okay, here is the final part of the story, approximately 800 words, concluding the narrative in the dim light of the lakeside cabin. With the shadows dancing around us and the lake whispering secrets outside, we stepped together, hand in hand, into the heart of the forbidden, into the fire that would consume us both. Time became fragmented, measured in stolen breaths, whispered words, and the frantic rhythm of our entangled bodies. The cabin, once a refuge, now transformed into a clandestine haven, a silent witness to our transgression, and the immediate aftermath. A strange quiet descended, a hush more profound than the lake's usual stillness. We lay tangled together, limbs intertwined, chests rising and falling in ragged unison, the echoes of our passion still vibrating in the air around us. The fire that had consumed us moments before began to recede, leaving behind a residue of warmth, exhaustion, and a dawning sense of something else for Ethan. There was a youthful triumph in his eyes, a possessiveness in the way he held me close, as if staking a claim. He traced the curve of my shoulder with a fingertip, his gaze lingering on my face, a silent question in his blue depths. In his youthful exuberance, perhaps he hadn't fully grasped the weight of what we had done, the precarious ground we now occupied for me. The emotions were a tumultuous storm. Relief, certainly, a release of years of pent-up longing, a fleeting sense of having truly lived, truly felt again. But beneath the surface of exhilaration, a cold dread began to seep in, a chilling awareness of the wreckage we had created, the lines we had irrevocably crossed. Guilt, sharp and biting, twisted in my stomach, a constant, sickening reminder of Richard, oblivious in the next room, of the vows I had broken, the trust one had shattered. I pulled away slightly, the sudden coolness of the air against my skin a stark contrast to the lingering heat of Ethan's body. I sat up, pulling the tangled sheet around myself, my gaze averted, unable to meet his. The cabin, in the dim light, suddenly felt smaller, more confining, the shadows seeming to press in, accusing. Clara? Ethan's voice was soft, hesitant, the earlier triumph replaced with a tentative concern. He reached for my hand, his touch gentle now, searching. Are you all right? All right? The word echoed in the sudden silence, a cruel mockery of the turmoil within me. No, I whispered, the confession torn from me, raw and honest. No, Ethan, I'm not all right. He sat up too, his youthful brow furrowed, his blue eyes clouded with confusion. But I thought, he trailed off, the unspoken expectation hanging heavy in the air between us. He thought this was just the beginning. And perhaps, in some reckless, terrifying corner of my heart, I had thought so too, but the reality of it crashed down on me, a cold, suffocating weight. This wasn't a beginning, it was an ending of innocence, an ending of my carefully constructed life, an ending, perhaps, of everything I held dear. Ethan, I said, my voice stronger now, laced with a painful clarity, this can't happen again. The confusion in his eyes deepened, replaced by a dawning hurt, a youthful bewilderment at the sudden shift.
What?
But, Clara, last night was a mistake. I interrupted, the words sharp, cutting through the fragile silence. Cruel, perhaps, but necessary. For both of us. A beautiful, terrible mistake. But a mistake nonetheless. The hurt in his eyes sharpened, becoming something closer to anger, a youthful resentment at the sudden rejection. So that's it? It meant nothing to you? All those feelings. It meant something, I conceded, the words softer now, laced with a deep, aching sadness. It meant a moment of madness, Ethan. A moment of weakness. But it can't be more than that. It shouldn't be more than that. I stood up, pulling the sheet tighter around me, my movements stiff, mechanical. Richard is here, Ethan, I said, stating the obvious, the insurmountable barrier that loomed between us. This is his cabin. You're his godson. I'm his wife. It's impossible. He watched me, his youthful face a mask of confusion and hurt, the raw desire of the previous hours replaced by a bewildered pain. He didn't argue, didn't protest, the weight of my words, the cold reality of the situation, finally sinking in. I understand, he said finally, his voice low, defeated, the youthful fire in his eyes dimmed, extinguished. But did he really? Could he truly understand the tangled web of guilt, obligation, and regret that was already tightening around me? I doubted it. He was young, still untainted by the complexities and compromises of a life lived, a life like mine. I turned away, unable to bear the weight of his gaze, the silent accusation in his wounded eyes. Please, Ethan, I whispered, my voice breaking. Just go. Please. He didn't move for a long moment, the silence stretching, heavy with unspoken words, with the weight of a forbidden connection broken before it could truly begin. Then, with a slow, reluctant movement, he rose from the bed, his gaze lingering on me for a final, heartbreaking moment, a silent farewell, a ghost of a touch. And then, without another word, he turned and walked away, leaving me alone in the dim, accusing silence of the lakeside cabin, with nothing but the ashes of a forbidden fire and the cold, heavy weight of my own choices. The lake whispered on, indifferent to the human drama that had just unfolded beside its still, gray waters, carrying its secrets into the dawn.